But as we get to the later rounds, like you're talking about, I'm not thrilled about Cousins. I'm not thrilled necessarily about Tua. Tua seems like he should be sort of an easy winner. I mean, they have a really nice skill position group around him. You have Tyreek, you have Waddle, obviously Gesicki and other pieces, and yet, that's I don't love paying their prices because I'm a little bit concerned that Tua can necessarily support all of that. It's tricky. These ranges are very tricky. I think I'm right there with you on Lance. Lance seems like a very clear target right now. He's somebody that in Dynasty I've been telling people I don't want to be acquiring right now until Jimmy Garoppolo is not on the roster because he's so expensive in Dynasty that I don't think he can get more expensive if and when Garoppolo is not on the roster. If Garoppolo is still on the roster, even if Lance is starting, then you have this issue of, hey, Lance might not even be the starter the whole year if he's not good. But in best ball or in season long, at the price that you have to pay to get him on your roster, that's not as much of a concern. That's not the reason that's a concern in Dynasty is if he does get benched in this coming year after not playing in all of year one, you could see his value really crater in a Dynasty format. In best ball, that's a bad outcome, but we're just sort of looking for upside and short-term upside, and we're not killed. I mean, it's a problem if he's not playing, but we're not killed in the same way as Dynasty where it reverberates over multiple years. We're just, we lose that roster. But that's why we're more focused on these extreme upside outcomes as well, because we're just trying to maximize our win percentage. And Lance is such a clear upside play with the rushing ability. If he shows any confidence as a passer and with the weapons he has, I mean, you have to assume that he can. And so, like you said, he doesn't have to be great as a passer. He doesn't need the big pass TD rate. The rushing value is going to provide a really strong floor. And I mean, it's been beat to death. He only had a couple of starts last year, but he ran a ton in those games. I mean, it was like, Lamar Jackson going into Lamar Jackson's second year where it's like, well, this guy's rushing profile could actually be not just good. And there are degrees to this, and his could be at the very top of the league. And that means he doesn't even have to be average as a passer, right? And so, I mean, I think that's something that gets missed. Oh, yeah, I have a mobile quarterback, but what is that mobile quarterback's actual range? Lance's range includes best-in-class rushing production, which would really shift his range of outcomes. It would make his floor plenty high every single week. It would make his ceiling incredibly high as well. It would almost lock him in to the top 10, probably the top 6 or so, if he's like an 800-yard, 8-touchdown rusher, which is very possible, I think. And so he's an easy one. Fields has that element to him too, and that's the argument. Even though his team looks horrible, he could be that type of rusher too. It's hard because it's hard to imagine that he can even be an average passer, right? And so he would have to hit that ceiling as a rusher, to have the below average passing stats then equate to real upside. If he's a pretty average mobile quarterback in terms of his rushing stats, that's not going to propel him into the top 10 on itself, by itself. He'd have to add some pretty good passing efficiency. I mean, all of these things are going to, relate to each other. With Fields, that looks like a really tough outcome. The way I've described it recently on the show is that he's going to have to make some significant improvements basically to just look average. He's going to have to play above average because the surrounding cast is not going to elevate him by any means. The guy outside the top 20 that I'm interested in, I mean, there's a couple. I think Zach Wilson is a cheap way of playing that second-year quarterback group. You have to love the upgrades and the skill positions, and sort of similar to what I was describing with Lance. In the scenarios where he's bad, that hurts you, but it doesn't necessarily, it is what it is, basically, for that roster. I mean, it kind of does kill you, but it's not, it's one team. You want some exposure to him because there are outcomes where he's good enough that surrounding cast is going to elevate him. The other guy for me is Ryan Tannehill, who I think the fantasy community is just low on. I think we talked about him recently in a dynasty perspective or in dynasty light, but I mean, Malik Willis is there. Malik Willis is very exciting from a fantasy perspective if he ever plays, but he's a third-round rookie. Tannehill led the Titans to a number 1 overall seed last year. Yes, they're going to be run heavy with Derrick Henry. Yes, their receiving room is weaker without A.J. Brown. There's absolutely no question. He lost Corey Davis, the year before, and they can continue to get depleted. If you go look at their depth chart, I mean, I'm thinking Nick Westbrook-Akine is going to be playing a pretty good role. They brought in Austin Hooper. I mean, like, these are the guys that once projections roll around, people are going to be saying, well, somebody on Tennessee's got to catch passes. Obviously, Treylon Burks is there, but we haven't got great early reports from him. I still think they're a dark horse or maybe not a dark horse, maybe a front runner to land one of these available receivers. Maybe Julio Jones's makes sense, obviously, given that they were the ones who cut him. I was looking up Will Fuller the other day and saw some Titans blogs that are kind of pleading with the Titans to go go sign Will Fuller, which would be, the type of player that they need to add, because him and Treylon Burks with Austin Hooper, like, it's not good, but it's not that they could play off each other. Burks could play obviously closer to the line of scrimmage, is something that we know he does very well, and should be able to contribute early with, the yak ability and those things. And then you have Fuller stretching defenses. But if they add someone else like that, the thing that I love about Tannehill's profile since he took over as the Titans starting quarterback is he's had a lot of rushing touchdowns, even as he's into his 30s. He continues in their offensive scheme that has been pretty stable to rack up a pretty strong sort of rush TD per game rate. I'm not sure that I'm necessarily definitely going to bet on that to sustain. That's, quarterback rushing touchdowns are not particularly sticky year over year, but it is interesting. It's something that you even look, he's had at least one, I know, in his playoff games with Tennessee. You can look into his sample going into the playoffs as well. It's still pretty solid. I think, when you go and you dig into it, you look at the projections, okay, he's probably going to give me some rushing yardage. And I would guess a little bit better than average rush TD rate. And then it's just a question of, can they continue to be an efficient passing offense without AJ Brown? I don't know that the ceiling's massively high, but when you're talking about this point in the draft, I think he can be a back end of the quarterback window type quarterback. He's going at QB 23. He's a guy that I think, deserves to be in the top 20 or has the profile to compete with these back end of the top 20 guys, the Kirk Cousins, if you will, who's at QB 16. So when you get at that point in the draft, he's a name that I'm definitely willing to look at and say, I think the fantasy community is a little bit down on just because of the Malik Willis pick, a little bit more down than they should be because Willis, third rounder, all these reasons that I said.
And you were mentioning the rushing upside from Tannehill there. He is, over the last 2 years, number 2 in rushing fantasy points over expectation. The only player who has generated more on a per game basis would be Kyler Murray. He runs more, which obviously gives you more opportunity to outperform on a per game basis there. That's, as you mentioned, as both a positive and a negative. He can score those touchdowns. There is some potential that if that snaps back, then his overall profile gets to be very weak, because within the context of this Titans offense, his total EP, not particularly high, 18.4. That's playable if you outperform it and if you have him paired with someone else who's good. Also playable if you think there is some breakout to the upside opportunity, as you kind of described with their receiving core and also just with their tendencies. It probably doesn't happen. And so from that perspective, we do need him to run. We do need it to be efficient. I would agree he's better than people give him credit for. I was interested in your take on Justin Fields. I might even be a little bit more optimistic than that, because one of the things that we do see, especially at the quarterback position, is you almost have this ceiling and this floor because of game script and how these games are going to play out. Quarterbacks, like an Aaron Rodgers, who are so explosive and so efficient in the first 2 or 3 quarters of the game, you don't need to continue to bury the opponent. And so you almost have to have sort of this Patriots revenge, Tom Brady-esque type of narrative situation where the team is definitely trying to pile all those points on to get the full value out of a really good QB. They're limited by how good they are. As long as you don't get benched, and as long as your team doesn't decide to just go David Montgomery into the middle, let's see if we can keep these deficits from being really ugly and embarrassing us, then perhaps there's a lot of fourth quarter upside with Fields, both running around and throwing to some of his guys here. One of the reasons we were higher than consensus on TJ Hawkinson and DeAndre Swift last season was that we did project them for heavy work in the fourth quarter of games early in the season that really paid off for us. And then obviously with Hawkinson, we had the injuries. With the Lions overall, they started to be surprisingly competitive. And perhaps the Bears will be surprisingly competitive in the second half of next season. I guess I wouldn't bet on that. But Fields, again, with the rush and pass dual threat ability, I like him there. But I'm going to throw one back out to you here as kind of my pick for outside the QB window. We debated a little bit during the NFL draft itself, and you were much more conservative on him. But I feel like Jared Goff now with these weapons becomes an interesting low-end play. Blair and I were drafting in the Superflex version of the contest. We took Goff in the 7th round when he fell below ADP. And that element that you mentioned with Tom Brady, that I think does make Tom Brady someone who is less appealing, and it really is one of the reasons that I don't have hardly any exposure, is that for someone where the stack element is important, and I think on these pass-heavy QBs especially, if they're going to be successful, it's going to be through the air. If they're successful through the air and you're in a tournament, it's going to pull one of the receivers with them. You need to have that pairing for it to work. And I don't want to pay for those guys. But you look at Jared Goff, and if he blows up, Amon-Ra St. Brown, DJ Chark, Jameson Williams, even if you want to go with something like TJ Hawkinson, you can put him with a pass catcher without having to pay that much. And we look back at Goff, and he gets so much criticism for how he played in 2020. You can look at the 2018 and the 2019 seasons, very, very good during those. But even in 2020, he averaged 20 points per game, and 73% of his finishes were QB2 or better. I was like, well, he's no longer in that situation with the Rams that is so good. He becomes this punchline with the Lions, but then he continued to fight. He had a couple of good games early, mostly bad during that stretch when the passing game was struggling. And then he comes back from his injury, and after week 10, he again averages 20 points per game. That corresponds with the Amon-Ra breakout, but it's also a time period where he doesn't actually have Hawkinson, doesn't have Swift for the most part. They play only really a handful of snaps during that stretch. He'll have those two guys. He'll have Chark. He'll have Williams, maybe especially over the second half of the season. He gets to be this interesting play. And he is someone who's scored in the past. Now, I've tried to make the case kind of for myself that he is an arbitrage play on Cousins or Tua. His performance over the last couple of years doesn't quite justify that. I mean, Kirk Cousins has been a solid NFL player, but if you look at Cousins, you look at Matt Ryan, you look at where they are in terms of arm strength, you look at some of the mistakes that they make, you look at some of the limitations they have from a fantasy perspective, and then you look at Jared Goff, these dome games, the weapons. I think if you're going to reach down into that area, he becomes a little bit of a compelling play.
I still have a hard time with it, with his complete lack of rushing ability, and knowing that when he was good in the past, his offenses were top 5, top 3 in some cases in the league in points. And so you're going to have high touchdown rates. He's obviously a part of that, but those Rams offenses were, I think you have to project the Lions to be ahead of schedule and be good this year. That might not be such a crazy projection. I do have a tough time with it, though. I would say when you're talking about the stack options, especially at Amon-Ra St. Brown's price, I don't think that I care to have Amon-Ra St. Brown in that stack, or even Hawkinson necessarily. I think the key, if you're going to play Goff, is that you do hit either DJ Chark or Jameson Williams, because I think the key to Goff's upside is the huge passing numbers that requires one of those guys to be a vertical element that Goff maybe hasn't always had. But if like Jameson Williams is an absolute boon, when he's ready, then you can see a path where that's elevating Goff stats, right? You're getting these long touchdowns that suddenly he looks a lot better. I mean, I think the Amon-Ra and Hawkinson guys underneath could be also part of those stacks. I'm just saying I don't think you necessarily need them. That, especially when you talk about prices, those guys going in the single-digit rounds, Jameson Williams and DJ Chark going outside the single-digit rounds, are the ones that, on teams where I hit those guys, now I think it makes some sense to be going to Goff, because you want to have the vertical element for Goff's numbers, I think, to get to where they need to be.
And just to kind of finish out with a couple other late potential targets, I like Mac Jones. I think when you add Tyquan Thornton and Devontae Parker to this offense that has some guys that each of us like, he takes that second year leap. He was surprisingly good as a rookie. Sometimes when the offense isn't that flashy or the player isn't that flashy, the second year leap doesn't, you don't have to pay for it. And so that part is interesting with him. And then Ben, you and I are obviously on Marcus Mariota.
Yeah, Mariota at QB30, probably even a better bet than my Tannehill argument. Definitely, with going to add some mobility, and maybe he's just better than what we've had an opportunity to see from him so far. That's a little bit of a hope and a prayer, but at that price, again, these are the guys we're talking about that you don't necessarily want to be taking, almost if you can avoid it at all costs. But if you get into this range, these are the names that might save you. And I think you made some good counter arguments on Tannehill. You already sort of changed my opinion a bit there. As I was thinking through what you were saying, I was thinking, I think I can make a pretty compelling case that he could be like a QB 15 type, but there's not really that much upside. And so it's still just, you need him at a good price. You probably need to pair him with one of that elite tier. Like if you get a Kyler or a Lamar, and then you miss the QB window entirely for a QB2, I think Tannehill makes some sense as that sort of could be, the QB 15 overall next year in a way that would work on that type of a build. But I think I'm with you that he doesn't really have top 10 upside. I don't think I'm really sold that Goff does. I like Mac Jones as a potential step forward guy, but again, no mobility. So he has to take a big step forward. He has to be a guy who suddenly is competing for the league leading passing touchdowns and in passing yards. I don't know that this offense is going to allow him to do that. I've heard people talk about Davis Mills. No mobility. Don't think this offense is going to allow him to do that. I mean, Carson Wentz, we can just sort of LOL about. Mariota's maybe the one that because he adds the mobility. We didn't mention Daniel Jones. There's another one. Add some mobility. If the passing element is there as well, those guys, I think you can start to make a case, could be top 10 type players. Zach Wilson going a little higher, we also kind of mentioned. But that mobility is super, super important.